The National Motor Museum at Bewley is England's leading museum for motoring heritage. Over the last 50 years, Lord Montague, the owner of the museum, has collected an impressive range of cars in the beautiful countryside near England's New Forest. The museum covers all the years of motoring. Here's a Benz three-wheeler from 1886, the world's first motor car. Very nice. But what would Mr. Benz have made of the orange Mini? Very fruity. From bone shakers to supercars, Bewley has it all. But of course, we aren't here just to admire the scenery of Bewley, or to just admire the cars. We're here to talk concepts. And the man who knows most about concepts at Bewley is one of its senior staff, Steve Vokins. So the most obvious question for Steve is, why were concept cars originally produced?
Concept cars were originally done because the manufacturers wanted to gauge public opinion. Sometimes they'd have radical ideas, or sometimes they didn't have radical ideas, and they wanted to promise the car buyer of tomorrow better than they're actually offering them today.
In light of the falling numbers of visitors to motor shows after the war, astonishing concept cars were used as a way to get more people through the doors. Now we know that today's cars are designed using clay models and computers, but how did they do it in the good old days?
Concept cars really started in the early 50s, and in those early days what would happen is you'd get some bright-eyed designer like maybe Harley Earl or someone. They'd come up with some space-age concept. They'd put it on maybe a piece of A3 paper, just draw people in silver suits in a car of tomorrow, and then maybe they'd go to a full-size drawing on the wall. Before, if they liked that and it gained approval, they'd go to the expense of making a clay model. Sometimes quarter scale, sometimes full scale. In the case of the Ford X2000, that only ever got to quarter scale clay model, which is a shame really. Andy Saunders' car, the X2000, is his interpretation of what the clay model would have been like if it had gone all the way through to production of the full metal thing.
But what about crash testing? This is standard practice and of course law these days. But back in the classic age of motoring, you weren't a real motorist unless you had at least a few scars and bruises. Now, if you were to suggest to a high-flying company director that his big car could have been running on steam, he would laugh in your face. But believe it or not, steam power nearly became the popular choice over petrol engines. Honestly. One of the first steam cars was the Stanley Steamer in the early 1900s. Its current owner is enthusiast Bill Rich, who lives on the south coast. When it comes to petrol engines, the first decent example was this Mercedes-Benz created in the late 1800s. So the type of motive power we haven't yet mentioned is electric power. Surely that's a modern invention. Another type of propulsion that was a hopeful challenger to the petrol engine was gas turbine propulsion. This all sounds very high-tech, but what was involved in these types of vehicles?
Everyone thinks of electric cars as the way forward, the way of the future. It's a modern concept, it's the way to go. Wrong. People were thinking that 100 years ago. We've got the Bursey electric cab in the museum. It's 1898 and there were 70 of these things built, not just one. It's not a prototype. This thing had a big tray of batteries underneath and it was designed to replace the horse-drawn hansom cab. One problem, a range of just 30 miles between charges. So technically as a taxi cab it's pretty flawed, but nevertheless it shows that the petrol engine didn't have it all its own way in the early days. It wasn't just petrol, there was electric, there was steam, all sorts of things. So it was a really important car from that point of view, but it's not the only electric car. We've got a 1901 Columbia electric, built in the USA, and it was used by Queen Alexandra to go around the grounds of various royal palaces.